Hi, so this week's lab is going to be on LabView, which you guys had a little bit of in Presentation Graphics 1. So I'm going to hopefully refresh what you've learned in there and take it comfortably beyond there so that you'll be somewhat proficient in LabView by the time you're done. I want to remind you that if you do not use the school computers where LabView is installed, you can install it on your own computer at home. If you go to this website here, which is in Moodle, it'll cost you $20. You'll also have to photocopy your ID or scan it in and send it to them. They will only give it to a student at this low price. With this particular version, you'll be able to do everything you can in here. If you do this route, budget some time to do this because it's a large program to download and install, and just be forewarned. Okay, so LabView is located, I think, under your Smart, or it should be under National Instruments, LabView. Mine is in, and I'm not sure this is the same version as what's in the lab, but under the useful shortcuts it should be in here as well. Right there. Okay. So what I'm going to do in this particular lab is follow this document that's in Moodle, and we'll go through and review virtual instruments, front panel, back panel, controls and indicators, signals and charts, and graphs, and then lastly we'll do some structures. This particular exercise, or this particular lab, has 3 exercises that you're going to have to do on your own. So I'm going to go through these bullets before, and this should be enough information in here if you follow me through here to be able to do the exercise. The report that you submit should take a copy of the front panel and the block diagram, and you should put that in your report with a figure caption. So I've given you the front panel for all of these exercises, so your job is to create the back panel, and hopefully it generates some figures similar to what are in here. Okay, so let's start. So let's just go through here, and first thing I want to do is create a VI that has numeric control, and the nomenclature for LabView is a numerical control is something that is more or less an input, or in their parlance, a source, and adds 15 to it. So it adds in 15 to that input value and then outputs it to a numeric indicator, again, LabView parlance, and that's also called a sync. So let's go to LabView. I'm going to go to a front panel. Thing I've got here, I'll just delete this. So I'm back to nowhere. And I want to have a numeric control. So I'm going to right click out here on my front panel. As you may remember, there's a front panel and a block diagram. Okay, so this is sort of the front of the instrument, the front of the VI, or the virtual instrument, and these are the guts. This is how it's all wired together. You can, if you don't see one, you can always get the other one by going to Window, Block Diagram, Window, Front Panel. Okay, so let's design our front panel first. I said I wanted to have a numeric indicator, so I right-click anywhere out here, and then I can expand it, and I can sort of see this enormous number of things that I can put on the front panel. So the hard part is finding out what I want to put. So I want to have a numeric control, and I'm just going to have a simple numeric control like this. And as soon as I did that, it appeared in the back panel. And then I want to add 15 to it. Right click again. It's not one of my express values. If I hover over it, I can see what it is. I want to have a numeric indicator. So I was looking for something else. So text control, no, I want to have a numeric indicator, and just a simple one. So this is my input, and this is my output. And I want to add, so there's a slight right click in here, I get all the selection here, structures, no, is it related to numeric? Yeah, I guess so. Let me click on that. I see these add, multiply, and divide, and all these other things here. So what I want to do is add 15 to the input number. Okay, when I'm back here in the back panel, I have my cursor can either be a select tool, like this cross. It can be an arrow, which means I've selected this object, or it can be a bool of wire, which means I'm ready to wire. So if I hover around an output or a port, I get the bool and I wire. And now I also want to create a constant here of 15. So what I can do is hover here, see the bool, and then right click, and then create a constant, a control, or an indicator. And what I want to do is create a constant. Now this is something that I can only edit from the back panel. Put a 15 in there. And then wire that over to here. Okay, now I'm ready to run. When I'm ready to run, there's a complete arrow. If something isn't complete, this arrow doesn't look like this. It's a broken arrow. So now I'll put maybe a value in here of 6. I let it run. 6 plus 15 is 21. Okay, now I wanted to maybe, instead of using a numeric indicator, I want to use a dial. Numeric control. So I'll use a dial. So it appears the same way. Now I got to wire this one. Okay, I'll dial this up to it's a floating point value, so it's 3.98. Run it. 15 plus that is that. Okay, that might be sort of a pain in the neck if I am always stuck with double precision. So I can change the type of variable this is by right-clicking on it again, and change the representation from a double floating point to, for instance, an integer. Assigned integer, 32 bits long. I can do the same with this constant. Okay, now you'll notice when I turn this dial, I'm stuck at integer values. I can't go in between. So I'll go to 6 again here. That's 21. Okay, now I want to do some string stuff. I don't want to have numbers. So I can do text controls. So there's my input and an indicator, string indicator. Notice one thing. The input is a clear panel and the output is a clouded panel. Also note that the input port is on the right side and the output port, port is on the left side. Also note that a string is a pink value. I don't know if you remember, but the double precision was orange. and the integer value is blue. So you can sort of tell what sort of data is going between these two. So I'll put some text data in here and then run it. And it appears at the output. Okay. Okay, the next thing is to create a decimal value from to a string. And so I want to have a decimal input or some kind of numeric input. And I want to have a string indicator. So if I simply try to connect these, I get an error. I can't mix those two types of data. String is interpreted differently than a numeric value. So I have to convert them. If I want to get rid of this broken line, I do Control B, right click, and now I have to search. So I'm going to programming, and I start looking through here. I see the string icon has a whole bunch of choices here. Start looking through this. String to number, that sounds good. And I look in there, and there's even more. A number to decimal string. Let's do that one. Okay, and I hover over it, it tells me what it is. The other thing I could do is do help, show context help. Over in the right corner, if I click on an object, it sort of gives me a help about what that thing is. Okay, so the number goes in the upper left here. And this is the width. So let's see what happens when I hook this up. And I put the number 4 in here. The string 4 comes out. Let's see what happens when I do, because this is a double precision, so this can support fractional numbers. And what it did is it rounded it up. It can't do those kind of numbers. So what I could do is look further number to fractional string. So that one would probably do it. Control B, get rid of those. All right, now let's try it. Okay, and it gives me my 4.56 with a ton of precision. The default precision is 6. Hover over it, right click, create, constant. I could change that to a 2. And even if I had extra numbers here, it locks me to 2 places of precision. So the next thing I'm going to do is convert. I'm going to flatten I'm going to reverse the order. I'm going to flatten an integer to a string value. What does that mean? So when you represent string data, what this is just a bunch of ASCII characters, one after the other. So the I actually is whatever the ASCII I value is, the ASCII N, and so on. These are just 8-bit numbers that are all in sequence. And a lot of times the communication between two instruments, you might say, may be in ASCII characters. You may be communicating ASCII characters to each other, but what you really want is the number. So in order to Labview to deal with those ASCII numbers coming in, those ASCII values that are really just numbers, you'd have to flatten that data. Okay, so it would come in as a number, or in this particular case, I'm converting it to a string. So let me go here, and what I'll do is I want to create a numerical input. And a text indicator. So there they are. And now I want to get the actual value, the ASCII value for this number, as opposed to just converting it like this. And in order to do that, I don't know where they are, so I'm going to say flatten to a string. Okay, so if I don't use this search feature, I'm never really going to get off the ground. If every time that I get out here, I have to, sort of look through all of these options, all these nested options, I should say, because some of them are nests within nests, I'm going to get lost. So what I'm going to do is a search, and I'll say unflatten from a string or flatten to a string. So I'll say flatten to a string. Double click on that, and there it is. It's in mathematics under numeric and data manipulation. So I could simply say mathematics, numeric, data manipulation, flatten to a string. Okay, so I'm going to come in here, connect that to my anything. There's my string. Let's see what happens now. Let's put a number in here. Let's say 77. And I run it, and I get some weird characters coming out of there. If I look at my ASCII table, that's probably not what I wanted for the 77. So let's go look at an ASCII table. Okay, so I've got my 77, should be an M. So why isn't it an M? Okay, the answer is because this is double precision number. So it's represented as a double precision. So the number coming out of this is, what, 8 bytes long. It's got a mantissa and all this stuff. So if you go look to see how double precision numbers are laid out, you'll see that it's not quite as simple as it might look here. So what I need to do is convert this, right-click, to an integer value. A character is only 8 bits long. Why don't I'll make it 32. But it's an integer value. Okay, so now my 77 gets represented as that M, the way we expected it to be. Okay, so what else? Why do I have this space here? Well, remember I took 8 bytes to do that. So some of this are some of the space in here are the extra bytes that I'm not using. So let's just try playing around with this. If I put a 78 in and I run it, it's an N. So I'm clearly in the capital letters here. Okay. If I go to my table here, I'll put any value in there. A decimal value of 119 should give me a small w. And there it is. Okay, I think we get that. Okay, the next thing, implement a VI that implements the following Boolean expression. X equals not A and B, or A and not B. Okay, this looks just like something we would see in digital circuits. Before I do that, I want you to make an observation here that I've got three things going on at once. If I want to see how these are executed, I can hit this light bulb here, and when I run it, I see how the data flows. And one thing to note is that Labview is different than the text-based programming that you've been doing to this point, in that what controls the flow of the program is the data. So the data is going to flow, and things are just going to execute based on where the data is at that moment. In your text-based program like C, that most of you are taking now, the execution goes by the command. So you execute one command, then you go to the next, and then you go to the next, and so on. In Labview, that data that came out of this input, this numeric and this numeric, occurs simultaneously. Okay? So that creates problems or confusion down the line, because things can sort of happen simultaneously or out of sequence, and there's no real rhyme or reason for it. It's not like if I simply place this one over to the right that this is going to happen afterwards. It's simply dictated by how the data flows. Okay. So I wanted to implement a Boolean expression. So let's see. I want a Boolean input. So I right-click, and my buttons are Boolean inputs. So I can use a rocker. That could be my A. And a push button, and that could be my B. Okay, these are green. They're true or false. That's a Boolean number. And then I'm going to need a LED indicator, and that's my X value. Now I wanted to implement some logic to it. Programming Boolean. I want to do two ands. And then I need to do one OR. And I need to have a not. Two of these, and I'll just copy this. Control C, Control V, I got another one. Okay, so A, you guys took digital, this is pretty easy stuff. And then this one is not A. Okay, let's see what happens when we run it. I don't know what this is. Well, let's see what happens. So they must be the same. So now I change the state of this one, and it's on. So remember, this is an exclusive OR, so they're different. When they're different, I get a high value. So if I change this back, this should now be off. And if I change the value of it again, it should be on. And I'm running slowly here because I'm watching the data flow. Okay. Okay, so your exercise will be to create a VI that has two control inputs, A and B, both integer, I32, and there are several outputs, the sum of A and B in integer form, the sum of A and B in double precision, the output of the arctangent of A in degrees. Well, I got to show you something before you can do that. And then the ASCII value of the B value. And it should look like this. Okay, so the one thing that I haven't showed you is how to get the arctangent of a number. So if I right-click out here, well, let's create an input. A numerical control double precision, and then an output. Okay, what I'm going to do is put a formula in here. So where is that? Well, let's expand it. My express VI. Okay, it's under arithmetic and comparison, and it's a formula. I could have simply put a search in here. Formula. Okay. This is a neat thing. Okay, the input is called x1, and I can have other inputs. I could create well, for now, let's just keep it at one input. It's called x1. And what I want to do is take the arctangent of this, and I can just do text editing here. It's telling me when something isn't right here. So let's look for a formula. Tangent, cosine. I don't see arctangent here. More functions. Here's the arcsine. And then I can simply type in x1. Okay. So now when I execute this, the output, this is x, and this is arcsine of x. And the angle whose sine is 0 is 0. If I put in a 1.57 here, sorry, x can't be bigger than 1. 0.5, I get some number, and now I'm suspicious because I know the angle whose sine is 0.5 is 30 degrees. So what I'm going to need to do is convert this from radians divided by pi. Where's pi? I think there's a pi. There it is. Now let's run it. And there it is. It's 30 degrees. So I had to convert it from radians to degrees. You should be all set with completing this example now. Okay, the next thing we're going to be looking at are signals, and we'll plot those on charts and graphs. So a signal is what is going to be generated, for instance, from your your max, what's it called? Your National Instruments LabView Max, the little box that you guys got. So when you hook these up, they don't generate 1 point at a time. They'll generate, any number from 2 to thousands. So what we'll do is we don't have hardware, so what we're going to do is simulate a signal coming in. And that's under Express, simulate a signal. Okay, when I click on that, I get a whole selection of things here. I'm currently generating a signal at 10 hertz. It's a sine wave. It's got an amplitude of 1. And every time it runs, it's generating 1,000 samples. And it's generating 100 of them at a time. So it's all very confusing. That's why I'm only seeing one phase here, because I'm getting 100 samples generated at 1,000 hertz, and the frequency is 10. So I'm getting one phase. So if I change this to 1,000, I'll see 10 cycles. If I changed it to 10, I'm only seeing 1/10 of a cycle. So this is what's generated each time. If I increase the frequency here to 100, now I see one, but it's a lot choppier. Okay, so what did I want to do? I think I was just asking for the default. A 10.1 hertz signal, sine wave, with 1,000 points per second. So that was where we were. And let's generate 100. Okay, so that's what's happening there. Now, how do I display these? If I simply take this and I display it out to a numerical indicator, it hooks up okay. Note that this is a thicker line. This denotes that it's a signal. So when I hover over it, over in the upper right-hand corner, my context help is telling me that it's dynamic data. It's not a single value. It's 1,000 data points every time it runs. So when I hit run here, it's going to generate 1,000 data points. So let's see what that looks like here. Okay, it's only given me one number. That doesn't really help very much. So why don't I look on a graph indicator. So I right-click out there to get a graph. Now I run it, and there's my data. All auto-scaled, as you'll note. It figured out what the max and min were, and it filled it up just right. I may not want that. I may want to control my scale. So in that particular case, I'm going to right-click in here, X scale, turn off the auto scale, Y scale, turn off the Y scale. Then I can just simply go in here and I can change these values. Okay, there's my 100 data points at 1,000 hertz, and my signal is 10 hertz, so I get one full cycle. If I were to change this to 120, now this is going to grow here when I run it. I get a few more data points. Play around with that for a little bit. You really need to get a handle on this whole balance between how many points are being generated what the signal itself is, how many data points are being generated per second, and so on. Okay, so let's display on a chart and a graph. Let's see what happens when I display it on a chart. So this is a graph, and this is a chart. And they're probably going to look pretty similar. Okay. And what happens is, I've got to auto scale this one now. Oh, I'll change this to, okay. So what you're going to see is the chart will be a moving value, whereas this is going to reset to 0 each time. Because I'm only doing one iteration, I'm only seeing one iteration of this every time I click it, but when we put a while loop around this, you're going to see that this fills in. Trust me. Okay, so so we learned how to turn off the scaling. Create a square wave, 30 hertz, 40% duty cycle, 2,000 points per second, only 120 points. Okay, let's go in and do that. I want a square wave. I want a 40% duty cycle. I want to generate 2,000 data points per second. But I only want 120 points. Okay. And there it is. If I wanted to get more, if I wanted to see more of this, I'd have to add more points. Okay, now I can see more. Change the amplitude to 0.5 with an offset of 5. Okay, that's not too bad. Amplitude of 0.5 and an offset of 0.5. That will put me at 0. It's adding a DC offset. I didn't auto scale this one, so it filled it all up again. So this is auto scaled and this is not. Show in an, okay, so the next thing, a signal, you know, there's a whole bunch of values coming out of here at once. You know, in this particular case, there's 500. What if I wanted to select certain values out of that? Okay, this makes no sense because I'm looking at 120 data points at once, but I might want to look at the maximum value coming out of this. Or when you cut and paste, it appears here. And let's make this one the min. So how would I get those values? All right. So what I'm going to use is a function. Let's see where I can get it. Max and min. Let's see where that would be. That would probably work. Nope, not that one. It's got to have one input. Waveform in, dynamic data. Here's the max value, and here's the min value. No surprises, it's 1 and 0, because I have that offset. What if I added some noise to that to make it a little more realistic? So if my amplitude is 0.5, in this particular case my noise amplitude is even bigger. Let's make this a little more realistic. Now let's see what the max min values are. Okay, so they're changing because it's a noise figure. So the min is always less than 0 and the max is always greater than 1. Okay? Okay, so your job in this part is to create a sawtooth, 20 hertz, 1,000 points per second, 150 data points, an offset of 0, and an amplitude that can be controlled with a numeric input. Use an amplitude of 0.7. Add some noise and display on a waveform graph. Display the peak-to-peak value and the average value with numeric indicators. Should look like figure 2. Okay, so I think there's a few other things I could show you here. One is all of these values here I can control over here. So if I hover over it, the offset is here, the frequency is here. Let's play with the frequency. So I hover over it, right click, create a control. It's called frequency. Okay, so there it appears on the front panel. If it's a control, it'll appear on the front panel. Okay, so now when I run this, I get more or less the same thing, but if I double the frequency and then run it, I change the signal. Okay, so that will help you. The other thing is there's an Express VI that does this max min business. So let's go to Express Signal Analysis, Amplitude and Level. I believe this is it. Okay, so here I can do maximum, minimum, peak to peak, and so on. And when I do that, I create an output for each one of them. Control B clears me of all my broken wires. So now this would be my I believe this is my negative. Yeah. All right, so that should help you do that example, that last, or that exercise. Okay, I'm going to do these three things all at once here. Create a while loop for exercise 2 so they can be viewed continuously. So right now, every time I run it, I have to hit this and it stops. Usually what you want to do is something continuous. So you need to right-click out here and introduce a while loop across this. Okay, this will continue doing this so long as this value is false. And I can keep track of my iteration here. So if I right click, create indicator, here's my iteration. Oh man. So it'll keep track of how many times I do it. And if I want to slow this thing down, programming, timing, wait. And the value that I put in here, I'll create a constant here, 1,000. That'll happen every second now. So this will loop continuously, but it will slow it down to do it once a second. So now I'm going to run it. And now you'll note that the chart updates so that it doesn't ever throw data away. And now the window will just simply move. So for a lot of things, especially long-term things, a chart is much more useful than a graph. Okay? So you'll probably at some point be using those things. The other thing is when I run it, I mean, I'm used to using these but I can use this now to stop it as well. Note that the iteration is keeping track of how many times I've run through it. In this case, 4. Okay, now I'm going to use a different type of case structure, or sorry, structure. In this case, it's going to be a case structure, not a while loop, that will print out a string, x greater than y or y greater than x, depending on the relative value of 2 numeric controls. So let's go back here. So I don't need any of this stuff now. So I need 2 text indicators. Actually, I only need 1. I don't know why I did that. I don't need this one. I only need 1. I'm going to keep my while loop because I want to do these things continuously. And now I'm going to right click, and the executive control will give me sort of all the different structures that I can use. If I wanted to, it's under structures. In this case, I'm going to do a case structure. And okay. Now in here I need 2 numerical controls. This would be x. Let's use a dial instead of a boring number. I use a dial to put my number in. Okay, x, and the dial is actually y. And now I want to compare these two, and I want to generate a Boolean based on which one is greater than the other. So if x is greater than y, this will generate a true value, and it will execute what's in here. If it does not, if it's false, it will execute what's in here. There's actually 2 things that can occur. So if it's false, I'm going to I want to have a string constant. In this case, x is less than y. And I want to have that go output. So I drag it over to the edge of the loop. It's sort of a tunnel, creates a tunnel through the structure. And if it's true, x is greater than y. So true, false. Okay, two different things occur depending on whether this value is true or false. Okay, now if I run it, if I put in x is 7, x is greater than y. And now if I increase y, now x is less than y. And now x is greater than y. You can see it change there as I bring this knob back and forth. Okay, these are case structures. These occur quite a bit. You guys are used to using them in C language in the form of if statements. So in Labview, you have to do things in this sort of structure. Okay, then the next one we're going to use a for loop. So let's do a for loop. And it's going to loop n times where n is an input control value. Okay. So let me go here. I don't need any of this. So I'm going to have a numeric control n times, and then I'm going to display a numerical. Let's use a chart so I can see what they are each time. And I think those are my only inputs and outputs. So I also want to display the iteration. That will be an indicator. Okay. Let's build a for loop. Executive control. I don't see it there, so I need more choices. Okay, this is a double precision going into what needs to be an integer value, because I can't loop 1.3 times. So I'm going to right click, change this to an integer. And my iteration, again, I don't need this to be a double precision value. And then I'm going to display a random number between the values of 5 and 10. Okay, there's a function in here that generates a random value. I believe it's in mathematics. Numeric, random number generator. Okay, but it will generate a number between 0 and 1, and I need one between 5 and 10. So what I'm going to do is multiply this number. Why don't I use a function or a formula? So I'm going to take the number that comes in, and I'm going to multiply it by 5, and then add 5. So that should give me a number between 5 and 10. Spread things out a little bit. All right. This should work. Oh, I want to slow it down so it only goes once a second. Programming, timing. Okay, it didn't do anything because I had no loops here. So let's do it 3 times. So it did it 3 times, and it displayed the value between 5 and, let's do it more times. Let's do it 20 times for 20 seconds. $12, $13, $14, so it's keeping track of where the random number is. Okay. So your job is to create a VI that generates and displays a random number between 0 and 30 on a chart. It should also display a string greater than 15 or less than 15 depending on the value of that random number. It should be delayed to loop every second. The front panel should look like figure 3. So it looks like a lot like the one we just did. Okay, that's all for this lab. So there should be at least 6 figures in your report, your front panel and your rear panel, and then figure captions and maybe some texts would be nice to accompany the figures.